Marcus Chen wiped the grease from his hands with a dirty rag, squinting through the perpetual smog that hung over New Shanghai's industrial district. The salvage yard stretched endlessly around him, filled with the twisted remains of starships from a dozen different species. Most mechanics wouldn't touch alien tech, claiming it was too unpredictable, too dangerous. But Marcus had always been different. While other humans stuck to familiar human-made vessels, he had spent years learning the intricate biomechanical systems of the Zephyrians, the crystalline power cores of the Vex, and the living metal hulls of the Morphic Collective. The emergency beacon had been broadcasting for 3 days now, buried somewhere deep in the newest section of the yard. Most distress signals came from simple cargo haulers or passenger shuttles, easy fixes that paid decent credits. But this signal was different. The frequency pattern was unlike anything in the standard databases, pulsing with an almost organic rhythm that made Marcus's scanner equipment behave strangely. He followed the signal through towering mountains of scrap, past the skeletal remains of a Dominion battlecruiser and the melted hull of what had once been a Trader Guild merchant vessel. The beacon grew stronger as he approached a section of the yard that even the salvage crews avoided. Here the wrecks were older, stranger, covered in warning tags in languages that predated the current Galactic Council. The source of the signal lay partially buried beneath a collapsed cargo container. At first glance, Marcus thought it was another ship, but as he cleared away the debris, he realized he was looking at something far more extraordinary. The creature was massive, easily 40 feet from snout to tail, covered in scales that shifted from pure white to pale silver depending on the angle of the light. Its wings were folded tight against its body, but Marcus could see they were torn and burned, the delicate membrane riddled with holes. A dragon. An actual living dragon. Marcus had heard stories, of course. Every spacer had tales of the great dragons, the ancient beings who had supposedly ruled the galaxy before the rise of the current civilizations. Most dismissed them as myths, stories told in cantinas to impress gullible tourists. But here was proof that the legends were real. The dragon's breathing was labored, its great chest rising and falling in irregular patterns. One massive eye opened as Marcus approached, revealing an iris the color of Arctic ice. There was intelligence there, ancient and profound, but also pain and a desperate kind of hope. Marcus activated his medical scanner, designed primarily for biological components in hybrid bioships. The readings made him whistle low under his breath. The dragon's spine had been severed in 3 places, its nervous system completely disrupted. Whatever had done this damage had been thorough and cruel. The creature was completely paralyzed from the neck down, unable to move anything except its head and eyes. But the most disturbing discovery was the technology grafted onto the dragon's body. Crude cybernetic implants had been forced into its flesh, creating a patchwork of organic tissue and alien machinery. The work was amateur, brutal, clearly done by someone with no understanding of biomechanical integration. The implants were failing, slowly poisoning the dragon's system with electrical feedback and toxic coolants. Marcus pulled up his sleeve, revealing his own cybernetic arm. He had lost the original in a shuttlecraft accident 5 years ago, and the replacement was his own design, a perfect fusion of human engineering and alien biotechnology. If anyone could understand the dragon's condition, it was him. The dragon's eye tracked his movements as Marcus began setting up his equipment. He worked slowly, carefully, talking in a low, steady voice even though he wasn't sure the creature could understand him. "Easy there, big guy. I'm going to take a look at what they did to you. I've seen work like this before. Sloppy integration jobs by slavers and black market body modders. Don't worry, I can fix this." The preliminary scans revealed the full extent of the damage. The implants were designed to control the dragon's movement, turning the magnificent creature into nothing more than a living weapon. But the installation had gone wrong, causing catastrophic damage to the dragon's nervous system. Instead of controlling the beast, the slavers had simply paralyzed it. Marcus spent hours mapping the dragon's bioelectrical systems, comparing them to similar patterns in other species. Dragons, he discovered, had nervous systems unlike anything else in the galaxy. Their neurons were arranged in complex geometric patterns that seemed to follow mathematical principles beyond current scientific understanding. The electrical signals moved through their bodies in spirals and fractals, creating a 3-dimensional network of incredible sophistication. Working by lamplight as the sun set over the salvage yard, Marcus began to formulate a plan. The crude implants would have to be removed, but that was just the beginning. The dragon's severed spine could potentially be repaired using bioconductive mesh, a technique Marcus had pioneered for repairing damaged ship consciousness cores. It would require precise surgical work and components that didn't officially exist, but Marcus had access to the galaxy's largest collection of alien technology. The dragon watched him work, its ancient eyes following every movement. As the night wore on, Marcus began to feel a strange connection to the creature. There was something in its gaze that reminded him of his own struggles, his own refusal to accept limitations. When other mechanics said something couldn't be fixed, Marcus made it his mission to prove them wrong. By dawn, Marcus had completed his initial assessment. The repair would be the most challenging project of his career, requiring him to essentially rebuild the dragon's entire nervous system. It would take weeks, maybe months, and there was no guarantee of success. The smart thing would be to report the discovery to the authorities, let the xenobiologists and government scientists take over. But as the first rays of sunlight illuminated the dragon's alabaster scales, Marcus made his decision. He powered up his portable fusion generator and began unpacking his surgical tools. The dragon's eye met his, and in that moment, Marcus swore he saw something that looked like gratitude. The work began immediately, with Marcus carefully mapping each damaged neural pathway and planning the delicate process of integration. The dragon remained motionless but alert, its ice-blue gaze never leaving the human who had chosen to help rather than exploit. Neither of them could have imagined that this chance encounter would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. 3 weeks into the repair process, Marcus had established a routine that would have seemed impossible to any outside observer. Each morning he arrived at the hidden section of the salvage yard with fresh supplies and equipment liberated from various parts of his workshop. The dragon, who Marcus had begun calling Frost due to its pale coloration, watched every procedure with keen intelligence. The first major breakthrough came when Marcus successfully removed the crude control implants. The surgery required 16 hours of continuous work, with Marcus using micro-welders and bioextractors to carefully separate alien technology from living tissue. Frost remained perfectly still throughout the procedure, somehow understanding that any movement could be fatal. When the last implant was removed, a sound like distant thunder rumbled from the dragon's throat, the first vocalization Marcus had heard. The real challenge began with the spinal reconstruction. Dragon anatomy was unlike anything in Marcus's extensive database of alien species. Their vertebrae were not solid bone, but rather a complex lattice of crystalline material that conducted both electrical and what appeared to be some form of exotic energy. The severed connections had to be rebuilt, using a combination of bioconductive mesh and synthetic neural pathways that Marcus fabricated himself. Working in the depths of the salvage yard, surrounded by the detritus of 1,000 civilizations, Marcus felt more alive than he had in years. Each small success brought Frost closer to mobility, and the dragon's recovery became an obsession that consumed his every waking moment. He barely slept, surviving on stimulants and pure determination. The breakthrough came during the 4th week, when Marcus successfully restored sensation to Frost's left wing. The dragon's eye widened as feeling returned to tissue that had been numb for months. The wing twitched just barely, but it was movement. Real voluntary movement. Did you feel that? Marcus asked, exhaustion making his voice hoarse. Frost's massive head turned toward him, and for the first time Marcus heard the dragon speak. The voice was like controlled avalanche, deep and resonant, but unmistakably intelligent. The words came in standard galactic, though with an accent that suggested the language was learned rather than native. Yes, small repairer, I felt it. For the first time since the binding, I felt my wing respond to my will. Marcus nearly dropped his tools in shock. In all his research, he had found no evidence that dragons were capable of speech. Most xenobiologists classified them as semi-intelligent at best, more like very clever animals than true sapients. You can talk, Marcus said, stating the obvious. My kind has always possessed speech, Frost replied, amusement coloring the massive voice. We simply choose our words carefully. In my 4,000 years of existence, I have spoken to fewer than a dozen beings of other species. You are the first human to hear my voice, 4,000 years. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. This creature had been alive since before humans had left their home planet. had witnessed the rise and fall of entire civilizations. And now it was trapped in a broken body, dependent on a small-time mechanic for salvation. Why me? Marcus asked. Why trust me with this? Frost's ice-blue eye fixed on him with uncomfortable intensity. Because you do not see a tool to be exploited or a trophy to be displayed. You see a being in pain and your instinct is to heal. This is rare among the younger species. The conversation revealed the full scope of Frost's tragedy. The dragon had been one of the last of its kind, living in isolation on a forgotten world at the galaxy's rim. A group of consortium slavers had found the planet during an illegal mining operation. They had used neural disruptors to paralyze Frost, then crude cybernetic implants in an attempt to create a controllable weapon. But dragons, Frost explained, were not meant for slavery. Their minds were too vast, too interconnected with forces beyond normal understanding. The implants had caused feedback loops that ultimately paralyzed the slavers' entire fleet. In the chaos that followed, Frost's transport had crashed on New Shanghai, and the dragon had been buried in the salvage yard for almost a year before Marcus found the distress beacon. The others of my kind are gone, Frost said, pain evident even in that massive voice. I am the last. When I die, something irreplaceable will vanish from the galaxy forever. Marcus worked with renewed determination after that conversation. The dragon's loneliness resonated with his own experience as an outcast mechanic, always working alone, always misunderstood by his peers. But now he had a purpose beyond simple repair work. He was literally rebuilding a living legend. The next phase involved reconstructing Frost's primary nervous system. Dragons, Marcus learned, processed information in ways that defied human understanding. Their thoughts moved through their bodies in complex patterns that resembled three-dimensional music, more than simple electrical impulses. Recreating these pathways required Marcus to essentially become a composer, orchestrating billions of synthetic connections into harmonious patterns. He worked 18-hour days, surviving on nutrition bars and recycled coffee. His hands grew steadier with practice, his understanding of dragon physiology deepening with each successful connection. Frost guided him when possible, describing sensations and responses that helped Marcus fine-tune the rebuilt systems. By the end of the 6th week, Frost had regained sensation in both wings and limited movement in the left forearm. The dragon could turn its head freely and even raise it slightly from the ground. More importantly, the pain that had been constant since the implantation was finally beginning to fade. You have given me hope, Marcus Chen, Frost said during one of their evening conversations. I had accepted that I would die here, forgotten and broken. But you have shown me that the galaxy still contains beings of honor and compassion. Marcus felt a flush of pride at the words, but also a growing sense of responsibility. Frost was not just any patient. The dragon represented a connection to the galaxy's ancient past, a repository of knowledge and wisdom that could not be replaced. If Marcus failed in the reconstruction, something irreplaceable would be lost forever. As the 7th week began, Marcus prepared for the most challenging phase of the repair, reconnecting Frost's spinal column to the motor control centers in the dragon's brain. This would determine whether Frost would ever fly again, or remain forever earthbound despite their efforts. The dragon watched him prepare for the procedure with patient eyes, trusting completely in the skills of the lone human mechanic who had chosen to help rather than exploit. Neither of them spoke of the risks involved, but both understood that the next few days would determine Frost's fate. The final phase of the neural reconstruction required equipment that Marcus didn't officially possess. The bioharmonic resonators needed to properly integrate dragon neural pathways existed only in the most advanced xenobiological research facilities, and acquiring them through legitimate channels would have meant revealing Frost's existence to the authorities. Marcus had spent years cultivating relationships with smugglers, black market dealers, and salvage operators who asked no questions as long as the credits transferred correctly. Now those connections proved invaluable. A Vex trader provided crystalline neural conductors in exchange for pre-war human electronics. A former Morphic Collective engineer sold him biosynthetic mesh that could seamlessly integrate with organic tissue. A Zephyrian pirate captain delivered quantum-stabilized power cores that could provide the precise energy levels needed for dragon physiology. Each acquisition was a risk, but Marcus had become skilled at operating in the gray areas of galactic commerce. He paid in untraceable credits, met in abandoned sectors of the salvage yard, and never revealed the true purpose of his purchases. To the outside world, he was simply an eccentric mechanic with expensive tastes and spare parts. Frost watched these preparations with growing amazement. "You risk much for one you barely know," the dragon observed during one of their conversations. "Why do you not simply report my existence to your authorities? Surely there would be reward in such a discovery." Marcus paused in his calibration of a neural interface array, considering the question. "Because the moment I do that, you stop being Frost and become specimen number something. They'd want to study you, dissect you, turn you into data points and research papers. You'd spend whatever time you have left in a laboratory, instead of free in the stars where you belong." The dragon's expression was difficult to read, but Marcus caught something that might have been gratitude in those ancient eyes. "Your species is young, but you understand concepts that elude beings far older. There is wisdom in your choice." The conversation was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Vera Kozlov, Marcus's former apprentice and current rival, appeared at the edge of their makeshift medical facility. She had always been suspicious of Marcus's extended absences from his regular workshop, and her expression suggested she had finally decided to investigate. "Marcus, what the hell are you doing out here?" Vera's voice carried across the scrap-filled clearing, her tone mixing concern with irritation. "You've been missing for weeks, and your clients are starting to ask questions." Frost immediately went still, reverting to the lifeless pose that had first fooled Marcus into thinking the dragon was merely another piece of exotic wreckage. But Vera was too sharp to be deceived for long. Her cybernetic eye, a military-grade sensor array that could analyze almost any material, focused on the dragon's form. "That's not scrap metal," she said slowly, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Marcus, please tell me you haven't been hiding what I think you've been hiding." There was no point in denial. Vera had already seen too much, and her scanning equipment would reveal Frost's true nature within minutes. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. "Her name is Frost," he said simply. "She was injured by slavers and left for dead. I've been trying to repair the damage." Vera's reaction was immediate and explosive. "Are you completely insane? Do you have any idea what kind of attention this will bring? Dragons are supposed to be extinct, Marcus. The Council maintains strict protocols about any discovery of pre-civilization artifacts, especially living ones." "Which is exactly why I couldn't report it," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the situation spiraling out of control. "The moment the authorities get involved, she becomes government property. They'll cage her, study her, probably vivisect her in the name of scientific advancement." Frost chose that moment to reveal her consciousness, turning her massive head to regard Vera with cool assessment. "The small female speaks truth about your government's likely response," the dragon said, her voice causing Vera to stumble backward in shock. "They would indeed seek to cage me, as others have attempted in the past." Vera sat down heavily on a piece of debris, her face pale with shock. "This is real," she whispered. "An actual dragon, alive and talking. Marcus, do you understand what this means? The scientific implications alone could revolutionize our understanding of galactic history." "I understand that she's a person, not a research subject," Marcus replied firmly. "And right now she's a person who needs help, not analysis." The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of more visitors, though these were far less welcome. A sleek enforcement cruiser descended from the smoky sky, its hull bearing the distinctive markings of the Galactic Council's Xenobiological Monitoring Division. Someone had been tracking the unusual equipment purchases, or perhaps the energy signatures from Marcus's medical devices had finally attracted attention. 3 figures in environmental suits emerged from the cruiser, their movements suggesting military training despite their scientific credentials. The leader, a tall human with colonel's insignia, surveyed the scene with calculating eyes. "Dr. Elizabeth Rains, XMD Field Division," the woman announced, her voice amplified by her suit's speakers. "We've detected illegal possession of restricted xenobiological materials in this sector. All parties are required to submit to immediate inspection and documentation." Marcus stepped protectively in front of Frost, though he knew the gesture was futile. "This is private property," he said, stalling for time while his mind raced through possible escape scenarios. "Not when it involves potential biosecurity threats," Dr. Rains replied coldly. "Stand aside, citizen. We have full authority under Council Directive 847 to investigate any unauthorized xenobiological activity. Frost's eyes blazed with sudden fury, and for the first time since Marcus had found her, he glimpsed the power that dragons had once wielded. The air around them began to shimmer with heat distortion, and the dragon's voice carried harmonics that made nearby metal ring like struck bells. I am not a biosecurity threat, small human. I am Frost of the High Reaches, last of the star-touched, older than your entire civilization. You will not cage me as others have attempted. The display of power was impressive, but also dangerous. Marcus could see Dr. Rains reaching for what was undoubtedly a neural disruptor, the same type of weapon that had originally paralyzed Frost. The dragon was still too weak to defend herself effectively, and any confrontation would likely result in her recapture or death. Wait, Marcus called out, his mind racing. Before you do anything irreversible, let me show you something. He activated his portable holographic projector, displaying the complete neural mapping he had done of Frost's damaged systems. The three-dimensional display showed the intricate beauty of dragon neurology, the mathematical precision of their thought patterns, and the elegant solutions Marcus had devised for repairing the damage. This is the most sophisticated biological system ever documented, Marcus said, his voice filled with passionate conviction. Not because it's alien, but because it represents the pinnacle of natural neural evolution. The techniques I've developed to repair her could revolutionize medical treatment for dozens of species. Dr. Rains studied the holographic display with growing interest, her scientific curiosity warring with her bureaucratic obligations. Impressive work, she admitted. But unauthorized experimentation on unregistered xenobiological specimens is still a serious crime. Then let me finish the job, Marcus said. Give me 1 more week to complete the neural reconstruction. If I succeed, you'll have proof that dragons are not just intelligent but capable of peaceful coexistence with modern civilization. If I fail, you can take her for official study. The standoff continued as Dr. Rains weighed her options, unaware that her decision would ultimately determine not just Frost's fate, but the future relationship between humanity and one of the galaxy's most ancient species. Dr. Rains studied the holographic display for several tense minutes, while her team maintained defensive positions around the makeshift medical facility. Marcus could see the conflict playing out across her features, scientific fascination battling against bureaucratic protocol. Finally, she made a decision that surprised everyone present. 24 hours, she announced. I'm granting you a provisional research exemption under emergency xenobiological protocols. You have 1 day to demonstrate measurable progress in your reconstruction efforts. If successful, we'll discuss terms for official collaboration. If not, the specimen becomes council property for proper study. Marcus felt a surge of both relief and terror. 24 hours was nowhere near enough time to complete the complex neural integration he had planned, but it was better than immediate seizure. I'll need access to my full workshop, he said. Some of the equipment required is too large to transport here. Absolutely not, Dr. Rains replied firmly. The specimen remains here under constant supervision. My team will assist in transporting any equipment you require, but the dragon does not leave this location. Frost had remained silent during the negotiation, but now she spoke with quiet dignity. Dr. Rains, I appreciate your willingness to consider alternatives to immediate imprisonment. However, I must point out that referring to me as a specimen is both inaccurate and insulting. I am a sentient being with rights under the Galactic Convention on Sapient Species. The effect of these words on Dr. Rains was immediate and dramatic. Her scientific training had included extensive study of xenobiological intelligence markers, and Frost's sophisticated use of legal terminology demonstrated cognitive abilities far beyond what any previous dragon encounter had suggested. You understand interspecies law? Dr. Rains asked, her voice filled with amazement. I helped write portions of it, Frost replied calmly. The Convention on Sapient Species was drafted in 2847 Standard. I was present at the negotiations as an observer, though I chose to remain unidentified at the time. Section 12, subsection C specifically prohibits the detention of sapient beings for research purposes without their explicit consent. The revelation sent shockwaves through the entire group. If Frost's claims were true, then the dragon was not just an ancient relic but an active participant in modern galactic civilization. Dr. Rains immediately activated her communication equipment, undoubtedly reporting the situation to her superiors. Marcus used the distraction to begin the final phase of his repair work. The neural integration process required precise timing and could not be delayed for bureaucratic discussions. He activated the bioharmonic resonators, filling the air with a barely audible humming that seemed to make the very atoms vibrate in harmony. Vera, who had been watching the proceedings with wide-eyed amazement, finally found her voice. "Marcus, if what she's saying is true, then you're not just fixing a dragon. You're potentially restoring one of the galaxy's founding political figures." "I'm fixing my friend," Marcus replied simply. His attention focused on the delicate process of connecting synthetic neural pathways to organic tissue. Everything else is just politics. The work proceeded with agonizing precision. Each connection had to be perfectly calibrated to match Frost's unique neural frequencies. Too much power and the synthetic pathways would burn out. Too little, and the connections would fail to integrate with the dragon's natural systems. Marcus worked with the focused intensity of a surgeon performing life-saving surgery, because in many ways that's exactly what he was doing. Frost guided him through the process, describing the sensations as feeling slowly returned to her paralyzed body. "The left wing feels warm," she reported, "like sunlight after a long winter. The right wing is still cold, but I can sense the pathways forming." Dr. Rains watched the procedure with growing fascination, her scientific objectivity warring with genuine concern for Frost's well-being. "The neural activity patterns are unlike anything in our databases," she murmured to her colleagues. "If we could study these integration techniques—" "You can study them all you want," Marcus said without looking up from his work. "I'll share every detail of the process freely, but Frost decides her own fate once she's healed." Hours passed in intense concentration. Marcus's hands began to shake from exhaustion, but he pushed through the fatigue. This was his one chance to complete the reconstruction, and failure would mean Frost's permanent captivity. Vera assisted where she could, her own expertise in cybernetic integration proving invaluable as they worked to bridge the gap between organic and synthetic systems. The breakthrough came just as the 24-hour deadline approached. Marcus successfully restored the primary motor control pathways to Frost's wings, and for the first time in over a year, the dragon was able to extend them fully. The sight was breathtaking. Wings spanning nearly 60 feet, their pale membrane catching the light like captured moonbeams. But the true test came when Frost attempted to stand. The massive dragon struggled for several minutes, her long, unused muscles trembling with effort. Marcus watched anxiously, knowing that if the spinal reconstruction had failed, all their work would be meaningless. Slowly, magnificently, Frost rose to her feet. She stood unsteadily at first, like a newborn learning to walk, but with growing confidence as her reconstructed nervous system adapted to its new configuration. When she spread her wings and lifted her head toward the sky, everyone present felt the power and majesty that had once made dragons the undisputed rulers of the galaxy. "The reconstruction is complete," Marcus announced, his voice hoarse with emotion. "All major motor functions have been restored. The synthetic neural pathways have successfully integrated with organic systems." Dr. Rains was busy recording everything, her scientific excitement evident despite her professional demeanor. "This is revolutionary work," she said. "The applications for treating spinal injuries in other species could save millions of lives." Frost turned her attention to the council representative, her ice-blue eyes reflecting ancient wisdom. "Dr. Rains, I thank you for your patience and flexibility. Your willingness to see beyond bureaucratic protocol demonstrates the evolution of your species' wisdom." "What will you do now?" Dr. Rains asked. "If you truly helped draft the Sapient Species Convention, your legal status is clear. You're free to go wherever you choose." Frost looked at Marcus, who was quietly packing up his equipment. "First, I believe I owe a debt to the being who restored my freedom. Marcus Chen, you have given me not just mobility but hope for the future. How may I repay such a gift?" Marcus looked up from his tools, exhaustion and satisfaction warring in his expression. "Just fly," he said simply. "Show the galaxy that dragons aren't just legends. Show them that even the oldest wounds can heal with enough patience and skill." As if responding to his words, Frost crouched low and launched herself into the air. Her wings caught the wind with powerful strokes, lifting her massive form into the smoggy sky above New Shanghai. For the first time in over a year, a dragon soared free among the stars. and everyone who witnessed it knew they had seen something that would change the galaxy forever. News of the dragon's restoration spread across the galaxy with unprecedented speed. Within hours of Frost's first flight, footage from Dr. Raines's recording equipment had been transmitted to every major world, research station, and political center in known space. The reaction was immediate and dramatic, splitting galactic society into distinct factions almost overnight. The scientific community exploded with excitement and demands for access. Xenobiologists who had spent their entire careers studying theoretical dragon physiology suddenly found themselves faced with a living, breathing subject. Research institutions offered Marcus astronomical sums for the rights to study his reconstruction techniques, while others demanded that Frost submit to comprehensive medical examination for the benefit of galactic science. Political leaders reacted with a mixture of awe and concern. Dragons had been absent from galactic politics for over 1,000 years, and their sudden return raised uncomfortable questions about territorial claims, ancient treaties, and the validity of current governmental structures. Several minor worlds that had once served as dragon territories immediately began reviewing their colonial charters, wondering if their current independence was legitimate. Religious groups experienced the most dramatic upheaval. The Church of Ancient Wisdom, which had maintained that dragons were divine messengers, saw their membership explode as believers flocked to temples across the galaxy. Meanwhile, the Rationalist Coalition denounced the dragon's return as a threat to scientific progress, claiming that reverence for ancient beings would undermine technological advancement. But it was the criminal underworld that reacted most dangerously. Within days of the news breaking, bounty hunters and illegal specimen collectors began converging on New Shanghai. The black market value of dragon tissue, scales, or genetic material was beyond calculation, and dozens of heavily armed groups prepared to capture the galaxy's most valuable prize. Marcus found himself at the center of a storm he had never anticipated. His simple salvage yard was suddenly surrounded by reporters, scientists, government officials, and various unsavory characters who saw opportunity in Frost's restoration. The peaceful isolation where he had performed the reconstruction became a battleground of competing interests. "I never wanted any of this," Marcus confided to Vera as they watched another news crew set up equipment outside the yard's main gate. "I just wanted to help her fly again." "You can't put the quantum cat back in the box," Vera replied using an old spacer's expression. "What you did here changed everything. Frost isn't just a dragon anymore. She's a symbol, a living piece of galactic history that everyone wants to claim." Frost herself remained remarkably calm amid the chaos. She had taken up residence on a tall plateau of compressed scrap metal that gave her a commanding view of the entire salvage yard. From there, she could monitor the various groups gathering around the perimeter while maintaining her freedom of movement. Her mere presence was enough to keep most intruders at bay. But Marcus worried about the more desperate or well-armed treasure hunters. The situation reached a crisis point when a consortium military fleet entered New Shanghai's orbital space, claiming jurisdiction over all unregistered xenobiological assets. The same organization that had originally enslaved Frost was now attempting to reclaim her under the guise of legitimate authority. Admiral Vex Crathen, a cybernetically enhanced human with a reputation for ruthless efficiency, demanded Frost's immediate surrender for proper classification and containment. His fleet of 12 heavily armed vessels represented enough firepower to level New Shanghai's entire industrial district if their demands were not met. "I find it amusing," Frost observed to Marcus as they watched the consortium ships take position overhead, "that the descendants of those who once hunted my kind now attempt to use legal pretense to achieve the same goal." Marcus felt a growing sense of helplessness. His mechanical skills, which had been sufficient to heal Frost's injuries, were useless against military fleets and political maneuvering. "There has to be something we can do," he said. "Some way to keep you free without starting a war." Frost's response surprised him. "There is, but it requires trusting in abilities I have not used for many centuries. My kind did not rule the galaxy through physical strength alone." Marcus Chen. "We were also masters of the deeper sciences, the fundamental forces that lesser species have only begun to understand." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, Frost began to demonstrate. The dragon's scales shifted from pale white to deep silver, and the air around her began to shimmer with energy discharges that made nearby electronic equipment malfunction. The quantum field generators that powered New Shanghai's orbital defenses suddenly began operating at impossible efficiency levels, their output increasing by orders of magnitude. Within minutes, the planet's defensive grid had been transformed from a modest deterrent into a barrier capable of holding off an entire battle fleet. The consortium ships found their weapons systems inexplicably offline, their engines running at minimal power, and their navigation computers displaying readings that defied conventional physics. How? Dr. Raines asked, her scientific instruments going haywire as they attempted to measure the phenomenon. What's she doing to the local quantum field? Dragons were never just biological entities, Frost explained, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with reality itself. We are quantum-integrated beings, capable of directly manipulating the fundamental forces that your technology merely approximates. This is why your ancestors feared us and why some sought to control us. The display of power was both magnificent and terrifying. Marcus realized that he had been thinking of Frost as an injured animal to be healed, not recognizing the vast intelligence and capability that lay dormant within her paralyzed form. The dragon he had restored was not just a relic of the past, but a being whose abilities transcended current scientific understanding. Admiral Crathen's response was predictably aggressive. Unable to penetrate the enhanced planetary defenses, he began broadcasting threats of total orbital bombardment if Frost did not surrender immediately. The standoff escalated as other factions attempted to exploit the situation, with pirate fleets, corporate security forces, and independent treasure hunters all positioning themselves for potential action. This cannot continue, Frost said, her ancient voice heavy with regret. My presence here endangers too many innocents. Perhaps it would be better if I simply left, found some remote corner of the galaxy where my existence would not threaten others. No, Marcus said firmly. Running away just validates their claim that you're dangerous. You have as much right to exist freely as anyone else in this galaxy. Vera, who had been monitoring communications from the various fleets, suddenly looked up with excitement. Marcus, there might be another option. I've been analyzing the legal situation and there's a precedent that could work in our favor. She activated her portable holographic display, showing a complex legal document. The Sapient Species Convention, Section 47, Subsection M. It establishes the right of any sufficiently advanced sapient being to claim sovereign status over territories they have historically inhabited. Marcus stared at the legal text, not understanding its implications. But Frost's eyes blazed with sudden comprehension. Territorial sovereignty, the dragon said slowly. If I formally claim this salvage yard as sovereign dragon territory, then no external government has jurisdiction here. The convention would recognize my right to establish an independent state. Exactly, Vera said. And as the being who restored your capabilities, Marcus would have diplomatic immunity as your technical advisor. The consortium can't touch either of you without violating interspecies law. It was an audacious plan, but it offered a path forward that didn't require violence or surrender. Frost could establish a tiny dragon nation in the middle of a human salvage yard, using her ancient rights to create a safe haven in an increasingly dangerous situation. But claiming sovereignty would mean accepting responsibility not just for herself, but for anyone who chose to seek sanctuary in her territory. It would transform Frost from a free being into a head of state, with all the obligations and restrictions that role entailed. The formal declaration of sovereignty took place at dawn, with representatives from 36 governments, news organizations, and scientific institutions bearing witness. Frost stood atop her scrap metal plateau, her pale scales catching the first rays of sunlight as she spoke the ancient words that had not been heard in the galaxy for over a millennium. I, Frost of the High Reaches, last of the star-touched, do hereby claim these lands by right of ancient precedents and current habitation. Let this place be known as Sanctuary, a sovereign territory under dragon law, open to all beings who seek knowledge, healing, or refuge from persecution. The effect was immediate and legally binding. Under the terms of the Sapient Species Convention, Frost's claim automatically established diplomatic immunity for her territory. The various military fleets orbiting New Shanghai found themselves in violation of interstellar law if they continued their aggressive postures. Admiral Crathen's reaction was predictably furious. This is a legal fiction, He broadcast from his flagship, "A single being cannot establish a legitimate government. The consortium does not recognize this fraudulent claim to sovereignty." But Dr. Rains, who had been in constant communication with the Galactic Council throughout the crisis, had different news. "Actually, Admiral, the Council's legal division has reviewed the claim and found it valid under established precedent. The Zephyrian Collective was founded by a single individual, as was the Morphic Commonwealth. Historical precedent supports individual claims to sovereignty, especially when made by representatives of extinct civilizations." Marcus watched the proceedings with a mixture of pride and concern. Frost had successfully established her freedom, but the cost was enormous. She was now responsible for governing a territory, managing diplomatic relations, and protecting anyone who sought sanctuary within her borders. The injured dragon he had healed had become a head of state overnight. The first test of Sanctuary's new status came within hours. A transport ship carrying refugees from the Outer Rim conflicts requested permission to land, claiming asylum from consortium persecution. The refugees were a mixed group of humans, Vex, and other species who had been branded as dissidents for opposing colonial policies. "You don't have to take them," Marcus said as they watched the transport approach. "Your claim is legally valid whether you accept refugees or not." Frost considered this for a long moment, her ancient eyes reflecting complex emotions. "When I was paralyzed and helpless, you chose to help despite the risks. How can I do less for others who face similar desperation?" The decision to accept the refugees transformed Sanctuary from a legal abstraction into a functioning community. The salvage yard, which had once housed only broken machines and scrap metal, suddenly became home to families, children, and beings seeking a new start. Marcus found himself appointed as technical administrator, responsible for establishing infrastructure and managing the practical challenges of running a small nation. Vera proved invaluable in these efforts, using her engineering expertise to convert abandoned spacecraft into housing units and establishing power grids throughout the expanding settlement. Her relationship with Marcus evolved from professional rivalry to genuine partnership as they worked together to build something unprecedented in galactic history. The international community's response was mixed, but generally positive. Several minor worlds formally recognized Sanctuary's sovereignty, eager to establish diplomatic relations with the galaxy's newest government. Research institutions negotiated treaties for limited access to dragon knowledge, while humanitarian organizations praised Frost's open asylum policies. But not everyone approved of the new arrangement. Corporate interests that had been hoping to exploit dragon technology found themselves locked out by Sanctuary's strict intellectual property laws. Military organizations worried about the precedent of allowing individuals to claim sovereign territory. Criminal syndicates were frustrated by the Sanctuary's policy of protecting refugees from all forms of persecution. The most significant challenge came from within. As Sanctuary's population grew, managing the diverse needs of multiple species proved increasingly complex. Food requirements, atmospheric preferences, and cultural practices all had to be balanced in a space originally designed for storing scrap metal. "We need proper facilities," Marcus reported during one of their evening planning sessions. "Medical equipment for at least 6 different species, educational resources for the children, and industrial capacity to support a growing population." "The resources exist," Frost replied. Her attention focused on a holographic display showing orbital traffic patterns. "But acquiring them requires engaging with the broader galactic economy. We cannot remain completely isolated if we wish to serve our people's needs." The solution came from an unexpected source. News of Marcus's successful dragon restoration had reached the attention of the Galactic Medical Association, which offered to establish a research partnership with Sanctuary. In exchange for access to Marcus's neural reconstruction techniques, they would provide state-of-the-art medical facilities and training for local personnel. Similar arrangements followed with other organizations. The Interspecies Archaeological Society negotiated for access to Frost's historical knowledge in exchange for advanced educational resources. The Independent Traders Guild offered economic partnerships that would allow Sanctuary to participate in galactic commerce while maintaining its sovereignty. Within 6 months, Sanctuary had transformed from a desperate legal maneuver into a thriving micronation. The salvage yard was now a small city, with gleaming medical facilities, research laboratories, and residential areas that accommodated beings from across the galaxy. Marcus's workshop had become the center of a revolutionary medical technology industry, with patients traveling from distant worlds to benefit from his neural reconstruction techniques. But success brought new challenges. The consortium, still smarting from their failed attempt to reclaim Frost, began spreading propaganda about Sanctuary's supposed threat to galactic stability. Admiral Krathen appeared regularly on news programs, warning of the dangers posed by unregulated draconic technology and calling for international intervention. More concerning were the reports of other groups attempting to locate and capture any remaining dragons. If Frost truly was the last of her kind, then her death would end the possibility of dragon restoration forever. Several expeditions had launched to explore ancient dragon territories, searching for evidence of survivors or preserved genetic material. They still think of us as things to be collected rather than people to be respected, Frost observed after reviewing the latest intelligence reports. My freedom has only intensified their desire to possess what they cannot control. Marcus felt a growing sense of unease about the future. They had successfully established Sanctuary and provided refuge for hundreds of beings, but the underlying tensions that had created the crisis remained unresolved. The galaxy was still divided between those who saw dragons as ancient wisdom to be respected and those who viewed them as resources to be exploited. The situation reached a turning point when long-range sensors detected something impossible, approaching from the galaxy's outer rim. A massive energy signature, unlike anything in the databases, was moving toward the core worlds at velocities that defied conventional physics. As the readings became clearer, one terrifying possibility emerged. Frost was not the last dragon after all. The approaching energy signature resolved into something that defied every expectation. Not one dragon but 12, flying in perfect formation through the void between stars. Their scales gleamed with colors that had not been seen in the galaxy for millennia: deep crimson, brilliant gold, emerald green, and sapphire blue. At their head flew a massive black dragon whose presence seemed to bend space itself around him. Frost's reaction to the news was immediate and complex. Joy at discovering she was not alone, warred with concern about what this reunion might mean for Sanctuary and its inhabitants. Thane of the Void leads them, she said, studying the long-range sensor readings. He was my clutch brother, eldest among the survivors. If he comes now, it is because my restoration has awakened something that was meant to remain dormant. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the recycled air in Sanctuary's command center. Are they hostile? Should we be preparing defenses? Thane is not hostile in the way your people understand the term, Frost replied carefully. But he is ancient beyond measure, and his view of younger species has always been less charitable than mine. The dragons come not as conquerors, but as judges. The revelation that multiple dragons had survived sent shockwaves through galactic civilization. Panic buying emptied markets on a dozen worlds as governments desperately attempted to acquire weapons capable of threatening beings who could manipulate quantum fields with their thoughts. The consortium marshaled every available warship, while other military forces activated ancient defense protocols that had not been used for over 1,000 years. But it was the philosophical implications that proved most disturbing. If dragons had been alive and aware throughout the rise of modern civilization, why had they remained hidden? What did their sudden appearance mean for the billions of beings who had built societies on worlds once ruled by dragonkind? The answer came in a transmission that bypassed every known communication system in the galaxy. Thane's voice reached every inhabited world simultaneously, speaking in perfect standard galactic despite his supposed isolation from modern civilization. Young, species of the current age, the ancient dragon's voice resonated with power that made planetary communication networks vibrate in harmony. For 1,000 years we have watched you grow, stumble, and slowly learn the basic principles of civilization. We withdrew not from defeat, but from a desire to see if wisdom could emerge without our guidance. The transmission continued, laying out a history that contradicted everything in the official records. The dragons had not been driven extinct by advancing technology and territorial expansion. They had chosen to withdraw, establishing hidden refuges at the galaxy's edge, where they could observe the development of younger species without direct interference. Our sibling Frost's restoration by the mechanic Marcus Chen represents a significant milestone, Thane continued. For the first time since our withdrawal, one of the younger species has demonstrated the wisdom to heal rather than exploit, to restore rather than destroy. This gives us hope that the time of judgment may yield positive results. The implications of judgment sent terror through governmental halls across the galaxy. Ancient texts spoke of dragons as beings capable of reshaping reality itself, of civilizations that had been simply erased from existence when they failed to meet draconic standards of conduct. Now it seemed, the time had come for modern galactic civilization to face that same assessment. Marcus found himself at the center of attention once again, but this time, the pressure was infinitely greater. Representatives from every major government converged on Sanctuary, demanding that he use his relationship with Frost to intercede with the approaching dragons. Military leaders wanted him to provide intelligence about draconic capabilities, while political figures begged him to serve as a mediator. "I can't speak for an entire galaxy," Marcus protested during one particularly intense diplomatic session. "I'm just a mechanic who helped an injured being. I don't have any special insight into dragon psychology or politics." But Frost disagreed. "You have something far more valuable than insight. Marcus Chen, you have demonstrated the quality that Thane and the others will be evaluating. The ability to see suffering and respond with compassion rather than opportunism. Your actions prove that your species, despite its youth and frequent mistakes, possesses the potential for wisdom." The dragons arrived at New Shanghai 3 days later, their presence immediately transforming the local environment. The perpetual smog that had hung over the industrial district for decades was cleared away by quantum field manipulations that also purified the planet's atmosphere. Gravity fluctuations made nearby asteroids rearrange themselves into perfect geometric patterns, while electromagnetic effects caused the aurora to dance in daylight. Thane himself was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Easily twice Frost's size, his black scales absorbed light rather than reflecting it, making him appear as a void in the shape of a dragon. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that resonated in the bones of every listener. "Sister," he said to Frost, his tone carrying millennia of affection tempered by concern, "you have grown bold in your isolation. Establishing sovereignty among the younger species was not part of our agreement to remain withdrawn. Circumstances required adaptation," Frost replied with dignity. "I was injured and would have died without intervention. The human Marcus Chen chose to heal rather than exploit me. In gratitude, I offered him and others sanctuary from persecution. This seemed consistent with our deeper values, even if it violated the letter of our withdrawal agreement." The conversation between the dragons took place in full view of the assembled representatives, news crews and curious onlookers who had gathered around Sanctuary. Marcus realized that this was deliberate. The dragons were using their reunion as an opportunity to demonstrate their power and evaluate the responses of the younger species. Thane's attention turned to Marcus with intensity that felt like standing in the path of a solar flare. "Mechanic of the salvage yard, your actions have consequences beyond your understanding. By restoring our sister, you have forced us to make decisions we had hoped to delay for another millennium." "I don't understand," Marcus replied, struggling to maintain composure under that ancient gaze. "I just couldn't stand by and watch her suffer. Anyone with basic compassion would have done the same thing." "Would they?" Thane asked, and suddenly the air around them filled with holographic images showing Frost's discovery from multiple perspectives. Marcus watched himself making the initial decision to help, saw the moment when he chose to keep her existence secret rather than profit from it, observed his growing friendship with a being from an utterly different species. "Your government's representatives arrived with weapons and containment equipment," Thane continued, the images shifting to show Dr. Rains and her team's initial approach. "Corporate interests immediately began calculating the profit potential of dragon genetic material. Military organizations developed plans for weaponizing our capabilities. Yet you, who had the most to gain from exploitation, chose instead to heal." Marcus felt the weight of countless eyes upon him as he realized that his simple act of compassion had become a test case for the entire galaxy. The dragons were not here to conquer or destroy, but to determine whether modern civilization had matured enough to be trusted with continued existence. "The test is not complete," Thane announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the gathered crowd. We have observed your species' response to our return. Some among you have shown wisdom and restraint. Others have revealed the same destructive impulses that led to our original withdrawal. The final judgment will be based not on individual actions, but on collective choices. The ancient dragon gestured toward the assembled representatives, news crews and ordinary citizens who had gathered to witness the historic reunion. You have 1 year to demonstrate that your civilizations can coexist peacefully with beings of greater power. If you succeed, we will emerge from our isolation and share knowledge that could advance your species by millennia. If you fail, Thane did not finish the threat, but the implications hung heavy in the air. An entire galactic civilization was being placed on trial, with Marcus's simple act of mechanical skill serving as both catalyst and evidence for the defense. As the dragon settled into positions around Sanctuary, making it clear they intended to remain and observe, Marcus realized that his quiet life as a salvage yard mechanic was truly over. Whether he wanted it or not, he had become a bridge between species, a symbol of humanity's potential for wisdom, and quite possibly the key to determining whether modern civilization would be allowed to continue. The galaxy held its breath as the Year of Judgment began, with a lone human mechanic and a restored albino dragon standing at the center of the most important test in galactic history.